Now, the government's chief advisor on drugs policy has been sacked after insisting that alcohol and cigarettes are more dangerous than cannabis and ecstasy. The Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, said he no longer had confidence in the advice being given by Professor David Nutt, who'd also criticised ministers for reclassifying cannabis as a more serious drug. Daniel Sanford reports.
The trouble began when the government blatantly ignored its scientists' advice on cannabis. The scientists were upset, especially when ministers overruled them again on the dangers of ecstasy. Yesterday, the chairman of the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs was out there making his case once more.
I think it's really critical that the Misuse of Drugs Act properly represents the global harms of the drugs that are controlled in the Act, because unless the Act is correct, we can't give the right message.
Today, he was sacked. In the letter asking him to stand down, the Home Secretary Alan Johnson wrote, "Your recent comments have been lobbying for a change of government policy. I cannot have public confusion between scientific advice and policy and have therefore lost confidence in your ability." Tonight, Professor Nutt fought back, describing the Prime Minister as irrational and attacking the low standard of political debate about drugs.
We know what the harms are. Politicians don't know what the harms are. And what I find particularly worrying is that politicians are actually, underneath what they say, they're actually taking a moral position about drugs. They actually don't like people who take drugs and therefore want to dissuade them from taking drugs by pretending that the drugs are more harmful than they are.
In the past, Professor Nutt, who's an expert in the effect of drugs on brains, has said that cannabis produces only a relatively small risk of psychotic illness. That in terms of danger, there's not much difference between horse riding and ecstasy, and that alcohol and tobacco are more dangerous than cannabis and ecstasy. The drugs row has highlighted the risks for experts who counsel politicians, as the government's former chief scientific advisor explained.
Scientific advisors need to be able to win the trust of the public by speaking directly to the public, and I certainly did play that role when I was in government. However, it's also got to be recognised that in government you need to keep the trust of the government as well, of the cabinet. And so treading that line, frankly, is quite a challenge.
I think, frankly, it's disgraceful that the government has sacked Professor Nutt. What is the point of having independent scientific advice if as soon as you get some advice that you don't like, you sack the person who's given it to you?
No minister was available tonight to explain Professor Nutt's sacking from his unpaid role. All said they were busy in their constituencies. But the scientific community won't forget the way one of their own was treated when he dared to offer an opinion. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at the Home Office.